Hello, beautiful beloveds. Here for another video. It's been a while, and I've been intuitively guided to share this one for actually for a few years, and I had some resistance on several different levels. But here I am. We're going to talk about why I teach, and why I teach what I teach, and also give you a lens of some of my personal history, which is kind of like a walk through the valley of shadows in order to come into my empowerment. And so, yeah, there's some really personal shares in here. And some of it may be hard for some of those. We're going through this time of like the Epstein awakening and learning about how truly seedy so much of our world is. And this is a time where we need to come back into our power. And I did a Facebook post just recently that became so healing for so many people who have also been struggling with some of these issues around, being abused or sexually abused, emotionally abused, whatnot. And it's so much more common than we think. And we can't trust those who were the perpetrators to be our saviors, obviously. So here we are. So that will be woven into the story as well. So if this is a really tender time for you to hear about such things, you may want to save this for another day or, do something different for now. But I'm not going to be graphic. I'm not going to be, yeah, I'll just be subtle about it, but I want to also tell the truth. So, why do I teach? It's almost like I can't help it. Like, from the time I was a really little girl, I always wanted to play school. I was totally enamored with school. I did preschool 3 times before kindergarten. It was kinda like free daycare. And I love school so much, and I always wanted to play school with all of my friends and everything, and my beloved Aunt Sissy, who was like the saint of my childhood, she used to complain as I got older, "We always had to play school," she said, "and I always had to be the student." In other words, I always had to be the teacher. So I had to teach her everything that I was learning, and so I've just been wired that way my whole entire life. But also, like, yeah, as I went through my life, I always found myself in situations where I had to do some teaching, and then ended up having a career where I did a lot of teaching, which was really kind of amazing and magical that I fell into that, because I actually had a huge public speaking phobia where I'd have anxiety attacks and everything. And yeah, I just had to push through it because it was like part of my soul path, I guess. But why do I teach? It is definitely not for recognition or riches. I haven't experienced that. But I do have an ego reward for it, which helps keep me going. And that's that I get to live authentically, which is so important to me. I'm a creative, I'm an intuitive, and in this way I get to be authentic. And I always say that it is my mission to empower others as their own healer, which by engaging them in their own healing journey and teaching them how to do the work themselves, I get to really witness their transformation and their healing on all new levels and life changing ways, remarkable ways. And that is such a gift to my heart. And I'm here to be a champion for the great awakening that we're going through. And that isn't necessarily easy. We're all kind of confused and muddling our way through it. We're all having to face some really huge shadows as we do that within ourselves and in our world. And we're all like trying to find our way back into our empowerment. And this is so important to me. I know that's why I'm here on the planet. That's why if you're here listening to this, I know that's why you're here too. That's why we're drawn to be together. And I share my story just to kind of lay out my bare bones so it may offer healing wisdom for other people and empowerment as we go through, because we really are all in this together. So it's kind of the big picture. Yeah. And one of the themes that is really coming up in this era is around how we give our power away to others in all the different ways. And that may be showing up in our personal life. It may be a lot of conditioning from how we were raised. And it's time to really let that go. We need to be able to find our voices and stand together and stand for what is true and what is right in our society and in our world. And there's no time like the present to just like say, yeah, this is it. This is what we stand for. And so it's all about that really right now. So I'm going to share a little bit about my story. And my story, like all of us, we're all born like as these innocents, as being so connected still to our soul journey when we come into this world. Some of us are born like we come in with consciousness, and sometimes we're like, oh my God, like I don't want to come out of this womb. Have you experienced this life, these people? Like, I don't know, it's just not, it's kind of scary. I don't want to come out. And so like we go through that, and I did have a childhood that had a lot of trauma in it. There was a lot of emotional abuse and sexual abuse and a lot of rage and confusion and fear. I just didn't feel safe to be myself. And I think that that's true for so many of us who are like natural healers. And so I have so much compassion for the way that oftentimes we're born where we do not belong. So we have the hard path of finding out who we are by contrast. And that's just the way that it kind of flows for a lot of us or most of us. Um, but I had, because I lived in this like kind of fearful place, and I had there were these times when my parents would get in these really, really awful fights. And I feel called to bring this into the story because it plays into my healing journey. And we often had the police come to our house. And it was usually my dad who was all like bashed up with, broken glass wounds on his face or things like that. And the policeman, I remember he was like, after he'd been there a few times, he's like, and I know there's children in the home, and we will take them out if this doesn't stop. And so I remember being little, and I, was probably like 4 at the time that of this memory. Of each time that he would come, I would hide my sister and I behind the couch. And so she's younger than me. She would have only been about 2 years old. And trying to keep her and myself really, really quiet, even though we were terrified, because I didn't want us to be found. And so I really learned how to like regulate my energy and to offer comfort for her at the same time that I'm self-soothing myself. And so there were these 2 little girls that were terrified behind the couch, just doing the best we could to get through that situation without having something worse happen. So it was kind of my way of trying to control like the outcomes and help everybody to be okay. What a pattern of codependence to to live with for my whole entire life. Yeah, so there's that. But one of the things is that I felt really uncertain, and at one point asked God. I grew up Catholic, so that was my framework. When God and Jesus were like the ultimate like resources for how to get you out of a tough spot. And so I prayed to God that for help, and I didn't know what that would look like, but I really wanted to know. And so I remember after that prayer that I would go through the day, and more with each day, I had this sense of like deja vu. And so I didn't really know what that meant, but I kept trying to figure it out because it seemed really important. And then one day I woke up in the morning and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I just dreamed the whole entire day to come in the night." And I would lay there for a little bit, and I would review my dreams before I'd get up, and I'd be like, "Oh, okay. I can be with that. I can be with that." And then I would go through my whole entire day just kind of like trusting into all the things that I was shown that were revealing themselves as I went. And that was such a phenomenal gift, seriously. And it didn't last forever, but it lasted long enough that I really grew to touch it, to trust it. And then at some point, I told somebody about it, and they said, "Oh, Dee Dee, that's impossible." And it kind of went poof away. So another giving away my power, right? Should have just shh. But by then I did have a little bit more trust, and it seemed like I was gonna be okay. And so a little bit later, maybe a year or 2 later, I had been sick anyway for my whole entire childhood. I had horrible stomach aches. Um, and so that was always something that I was dealing with because of the fear. Like if I got my fear activated, I would just get really sick to my stomach. Which later I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was 9. They found that. And there was really no treatment for it. So that was rough. But anyway, so when I was about 6 years old, I think, it was before 7 for sure, 5 or 6. I was at a friend's house with my parents, and they had two matching Corvairs, a red and a blue Corvair. And those were they were kind of like fast Volkswagens and kind of sporty looking, which, is kind of like a Porsche. but, but we went to our friend's house. It was a couple hours away from home. It was kind of down some long country roads outside of the city. We were up in the Chicago area, suburbs then. And my parents had been drinking all day, and my dad had been doing some carpentry for them. And when it came time to go home, they were really, really drunk. And the people the friends who were visiting were trying to let them know, like, you need to not drive. And that was before there was a whole movement of awareness around drunk driving. That was way before that. But they were really concerned about their safety and well-being. But my parents had gotten in a really huge fight, and my mom was so angry. And she insisted on having my sister and I come with her. And my dad left a little bit afterward, maybe a few minutes, I'm not really sure. But we were driving down the road, and my mom was so angry. And so she was talking and, like, screaming and yelling and everything. And for whatever reason, she let me sit in the front seat, which was really unusual. Usually both of us, the kids, sat in the back seat. No car seats back then. And I was hiding on the floor, like, just trying to escape her wrath and soothe myself, ground myself. And she started talking about having like a suicide mission, how she was going to roll the car and kill us, and then my dad would come upon the rolled car, and then he would pay for for the way he felt. And so I just remember being so terrified and having this knowing that, like, I had to live, and there was a reason for me to be alive. I didn't really understand what death was, but I knew that that was not going to be good. Not going to be good for me and my path. And so I remember just, like, pleading with my mother. And finally, like, she calmed down a little bit, pulled herself out of whatever that red rage was that she was in. She pulled herself out enough, and we made it home. And I remember after that, I was so PTSD about getting in the car that I'd get in trouble every single time we had to go somewhere. It was terrifying for me to get in that car again. And eventually I learned how to soothe my way out of that. I learned so much about healing and about mastering my mind, in order to keep myself in a state of being able to function. And so I'm so grateful for that, because I feel like it contributed so much to the way that I learned to heal myself ultimately, which took, kind of a lifetime, and to help other people to heal. And so then I've told this story on my website page too. But there was a time when I was 8 years old, and we had moved down to South Florida, Fort Lauderdale, and I had been really, really sick. I had strep throat for a really long time. I missed a lot of school. And that evolved into an infection where I had like my whole face was swollen, and my neck and my throat was almost swollen shut. I couldn't talk at all. I woke up one morning to brush my teeth and I had blood running out of my mouth, and I didn't understand what was wrong. But we went to the doctor that day and he said, "Oh, she has to go to the hospital." And I ended up in there for 4 days on IV and antibiotics and fluids and everything. I was completely emaciated. I lost so much weight. I almost had no body weight after being sick for so long. And they put me in 30 days of quarantine. They wanted me to, not so much because of being contagious, because it was an infection, but they felt like I needed 30 days in bed in order to be able to recover my strength. I was so weak. And so I did that. And then I finally went back to school. And I had a really creative social studies teacher that year. I just loved her. She brought all these cultures to life for us in such beautiful ways. But we were studying manifest destiny, and she had built a teepee village model for our classroom. And we had all these assignments where we would like imagine ourselves as one of the people living in this teepee village and what life was like, and we had to journal as that person. And I loved it. It just brought so much creativity and imagination forward for me. And I remember one day I was standing over the village, and I just went into this trance state, and it was spontaneous. And I just started to see all these lifetimes go through my consciousness of different lifetimes that I had lived in the West and in amongst Native tribes here. And it was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what is happening to me. But all of a sudden, there were all these stories that were really, really alive for me. And so I tried to talk to my teacher about it, and she was kind of like, I don't know what that is. And so I went home and I tried to talk to my parents' friends and my friends and stuff, and they were all like, I don't know what that is. They said it was like some kind of a weird deja vu or something, but it wasn't like something from this life. I don't know. I never could figure it out for a really long time, that I was actually like reviewing other lifetimes. And that was so much alive for me. And there was this knowing that awakened in me at that time that I would have to move to the West, to the Western United States, in order to recover who I would be. And I just didn't really understand it, but I knew it was going to have to happen. And so, gosh, all the medical mysteries of my life, they just kind of continued on. And by the time I got into about high school and started to get more freedom and time away from my home, I started to recover a little bit of my strength. That ulcerative colitis was really a booger, and I would go down like really, really hard with such acute pain that I couldn't function. And that was just so much a part of my life until I got into my late teens and early 20s. But I did persevere. I did get better. Moving away from home was way helpful. And I got my life, I got a bit of a life, but I was always kind of intuitive, a little bit psychic. I always knew if somebody was in trouble that I cared about. And, before cell phones and just texting somebody, I would just know like I had to come in contact with them. I had to call them, had to get in touch. And I always knew when people were pregnant before they did. And so that was really fun in those years where all my friends were getting pregnant. I was like, oh, okay. Just you wait, Missy. Oh, so around the late 90s was really when I went through my first divorce in the 90s. And yeah, I didn't have very good luck with relationships back in the day. But I went through this huge awakening. I started to do a lot of like recovery work and going to a counselor. I started to recover some of the past life memories that I had forgotten, and especially around different things of child abuse and sexual abuse. And I had so many buried memories, but they all started to kind of come alive for me, which was very terrifying, very dysregulating. It was a very, very hard time. But I also had like the spiritual awakening as a part of that. So I started to come in contact with things like channeled information and just like this whole world of like spirituality was opening up to me in ways that were really remarkable. And I also started to study like Native American literature and spirituality at that time. There were some books that were coming out that were really amazing. And I felt like so inexplicably drawn to it, but it was hard to even really make meaning of it. And of course, by then I was living in Nevada and in Reno area. And and later I had some professors that were, of Native origins, and all kinds of things started to happen where I was able to gain more access to that information. And I also ended up with this really amazing career around the late 90s, where that eventually led to becoming a national trainer and developing curriculum and things like that, where it was just amazing. I was traveling all over the country and getting to learn all kinds of things and get to share them and repackage things and practice my writing. I love writing, it's one of my favorite things ever. And so that career was amazing. It was really amazing. And it lasted until 2009. So that was really, really great. Um, yeah, and one of the things that was happening around that time is, my other ex and I had bought some property out in Smith Valley, Nevada, and it was like a 5-acre parcel. It was on the edge of a forest where it was all full of like mountain lions and deers and all kind. Oh, it was just so magical up there in the just most beautiful country. And I kept having these visions of me in a completely different career where I would be like sitting on the earth in sacred circle and we would be sharing things. And I had this vision to build a yurt. And so I didn't know at the time, but there was something being seeded that was beyond my reckoning. So, and that relationship too, both of the first two husbands, those relationships ended up being really abusive at the end. It was like very uncomfortable. But in 2005, I actually got divorced again and moved back to Reno from Smith Valley. And I was at the time I was really suffering from the devastation of going through the divorce, which was really really hard for me. I put all my hopes and dreams and energy into that. But then we also started going through layoffs at my work. And so here I was starting off like kind of a new independent life, and at the same and we were working horrendous hours. I was sometimes I one time I clocked 120 hours in one week, but it was consistently 60 to 80 hours a week, and week after week, and I was traveling all the time. And so I was often driving or flying at night and trying to get home. And I was just really exhausted. I had been exhausted for a while. I was showing signs of like significant health problems. And yeah, where I would just have to go to bed all weekend if I had the weekend off, just to get ready to, go for another trip on Monday, and or Sunday night, and get myself together. And it was really hard. I was just exhausted. Like a kind of exhaustion you can't even articulate. It's just like bone weary. But I had no name for that. Well, I ended up coming back to Reno, and then I reconnected with Dana, my sweetie, and we had been friends for about 15 years at that time. And we got together, and there was a poster in a restaurant and called the Pneumatic Diner. It was like one of the first vegetarian restaurants in Reno at the time, and they had a poster for a Reiki class on the wall. And Dana said, I don't know what to get you for your birthday. This is around August of 2020 or 2006. And he said, I don't know what to get you for your birthday, but if you want, maybe we can go to that Reiki class together. And I had experienced Reiki before at the psychic fair in town. and had some really amazing experiences where I had like past life flashbacks. I had one vision that I saw where my friend was getting Reiki next to me from somebody else, and then when we got done with the Reiki, I started to describe like the whole vision that I saw, and then my friend started filling in the gaps. We had both been in the same place. There was like this huge castle and the tapestries and the music and the food and all this stuff. And like she had the same vision. I'm like, what is this Reiki stuff? I have to know. Well, when I was working all those hours, like there was no time for me to really like have a class or something like that. But it was always in the back of my mind, like someday I'm going to do that. So it was so synchronistic that Dana was, recommending that class. I was like, yes, let's do that. So in August in 2006, we did the Reiki class. So it was 20 years ago, almost 19 and a half years ago now. And, and wow, that was so dramatic for me. So being so exhausted and whatnot, like I would practice my Reiki every morning and every night for a little bit of time, and like I felt like I almost got a pass on my bad behavior. I felt like I had more energy. I felt more vibrant. I wasn't like I didn't feel so incapacitated on the weekends. I was able to, do stuff and have a little bit of fun and have a little bit of life. And I remember going to trainings when I was working, so hard and feeling so much more alive and more connected to my intuition and more confident. It was really strange. I went to do a training of trainers in Sacramento, and those were always kind of scary for me because would have to give feedback to people about how they could improve their teaching techniques or improve their delivery of the content, and that was always like, I don't really like to like critique people in that way. It was uncomfortable for me. So I remember like being kind of nervous about it. Plus I was supposed to have co-trainers, but I didn't. So I had to do the whole training on my own. And I just like sailed through that week with so much more presence and confidence and intuition and energy. I felt really, really great. And so I was like, wow, there's something really alchemical that's happening here. But it allowed me to just kind of keep pushing through, even though I probably could have used a rest. And so, like a month and a half later, Dana and I took Reiki too. And that was also so powerful. And I feel like that in that Reiki, we practiced some symbols that really help us with physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual healing and activation. And I found like my intuition that for many years I had kind of suppressed in myself. It just came really, really alive. And that was a gift, of course. And I remember again doing another training where like with Reiki, you're like doing hands-on healing, right? And I went to another training. I was in Berkeley this time, and we had this set up. I was working with a community coalition when we had no budget. Neither of us had any budget. There was no water, there was no snacks, and we were in a middle school where the furniture was a little bit small, not super small, but a little bit small. And there was no air conditioning, and it was like 100 degrees out the whole time that week we were training. And I remember training, like the whole time I would be like talking with my hands. I guess I do that. And that week, like there were no complaints. Everybody was super agreeable about like kind of like being uncomfortable, and about half of the class and were in the National Guard, which was a lot of big guys sitting in these small chairs. But everybody was just so pleasant and so kind-hearted, and the evaluations were great. I was like, whoa, what is happening here? I'm gonna talk with my hands more often. And then I remember having a really challenging emotional situation where I felt kind of threatened by somebody. And I remember like one night I started to have all these visions about what her life was like, and it wasn't like I was asking to psychically read her, because I don't do that with people, unless I have permission from them. But this just kind of spontaneously came through. But what it did is it just opened up my heart so much, so that I felt so much compassion and love for her. And that was really That was really huge. And then I had my Reiki master training in December of 2006. So within 4 months, did all the 3 levels of Reiki that we had available to us then. And that one just put me on a path of doing the deeper healing. So I had kept myself mobile and going all out, even though it was, it was just so hard on my body. But I had been running with chronic fatigue, and my autoimmune system was just trashed. I had chronic candida, and my the whole microbiome was just so messed up. And so I realized how sick I was. We finally, got help for that, started getting help for that, or at least the awareness of what it was. And Reiki just really helped me to just rest and really begin to take care of myself. And at the same time, like as we started our Reiki journey, one of the reasons that we got into it was because Dana's mom and his aunt were both going through their end of life. One from chronic pain, she had osteoarthritis, and his aunt had Alzheimer's. And so both of them were requiring quite a bit of coordination, along with his family members, which of course were amazing at helping. And his sister actually housed Dana's mom. But they both needed a lot of support. And when we would go over to see Dana's mom, she would literally go, "Give me energy." Like she had so much pain in her body. And she knew that like when we came around, she just felt calmer and more peaceful, and her pain levels went down. And so she was almost like desperate for us. And it was really hard to like just walk away, especially when she was in rehab and things like that, because she was so desperate for support and so frightened for herself. And it just gave us, so much energy to give her. That was better than our life force because, of course, like a lot of natural healers, we tend to give away our life force when we have nothing else to give, and when we don't even have enough of that. And with Reiki, at least we have something better than our life force to give. It's because it's a divinely guided, spiritual energy, and it's way more pure than any kind of life force I could give anybody else. So Reiki is so amazing for that. And so many people who are empathic and natural healers can benefit from Reiki, especially because it just gives us a much more grounded way of being in the world. So that's important. And yeah, so then Dana and I had gone camping at Harbor Knot Springs, and we had our camp set up. So we had like a pop-up camper, and we had stuff everywhere, and it would take like quite a while to break down. But one morning we woke up and Dana walked out of the camper, and he was kind of like almost like staggering. So I was kind of paying attention and watching him, and just intuitively thinking, that I needed to check in on him. And then when he came back, he was still like kind of like almost like a funky gait. And then he took one of the water bottles to take a drink of water, and when he drank it, and it was like running down his face. And I was like, "What is going on?" I asked him if he was okay, and he said, "I feel kind of funny." And so I knew it would take. We had no cell phones coverage out there, and I knew it would take hours, not if not most of the day, to break down camp, and especially by myself. And so I just started doing a ton of Reiki on him. And while I was doing Reiki, I got this intuition that we had a puppy at the time, and we'd already had labs done on her like a few times by the time she was about a year old. But we had never had labs done. We were going to an alternative doctor, and so we had never had our blood looked at, and I thought, we need to have our blood looked at. Both of us are kind of in, pretty pitiful shape. So what is going on? Because he was also very tired. Well, when we got back, we did find a doctor, and we got a blood test for him, and he was really anemic. Like he had way less than half of the red blood cells he was supposed to have. And the doctor said, "You know what? If you were in a car accident and you bled out that much blood, you wouldn't be able to get up. But whatever's happening, it's been so gradual that you just, barely even noticed that it was happening." And so they put him in the hospital to get a blood transfusion just to get him up to half of the red blood cells he was supposed to have. And then they started on a whole path of trying to find out what was wrong with him. And since Dana had gone through cancer treatment in the late 80s, when a time when the drugs and the treatment were particularly brutal, that's actually better now, but it was brutal, and he was convinced that there was a cancer again in his body that was probably caused by the treatment, but we just needed to find it. So he was swallowing cameras and doing bone marrow biopsies and like all these things that they were doing. And we just kept doing Reiki for him. And for me too. Like Reiki was just like part of our everyday existence. It was part of everything we did. From raking our food to, raking ourselves as we were going to sleep to, just constantly sharing Reiki with one another, which was extremely beautiful. And it was our life. And so we knew we had to heal. And so Dana went through probably close to a year's worth of tests, everything imaginable. And at the end of the year, our doctor said, we ran $1 million worth of tests and we don't know why you got sick and we don't know why you got better. But we were like, yeah, it was Reiki. It was Reiki. We got him out of a scrape, I feel, like whatever cancer they were looking for. They weren't able to find it. And so that was really helpful, to say the least. So, um, one of the things that I say about Reiki is that, the official title for me is like a Reiki master teacher, but I don't feel like I am the teacher. I feel like I set people, like I give them an orientation to Reiki, but Reiki itself is the teacher. And Reiki takes everybody on their own path. And for me, it just kind of opened up portals of intuition and knowing and spiritual guidance that helped me to get exactly where I was meant to go. And so Reiki told me that I was going to lose my job. I was working on a federal contract, and after 2001 with the Twin Towers and everything that happened at that time, federally funded programs that were like social work oriented were not so well funded anymore. It changed a lot of things in the field. And then in 2008, when there was that big crash, then it was even more. And so like I had layoffs in my, at our job going on like crazy. And it was so devastating to lose one after another after another. I was one of the last ones left standing. But it was so stressful. And so, but Spirit said, you're going to get laid off. You're going to have notice. You need to prepare. And so I loved my Reiki master, Laura Bruno. She is amazing. And she's also a coach. And I really felt guided to do something like she was doing. And so all of the, like, my business model and what my business cards would look like and what my business name was, like I started to dream everything, kind of like when I was a kid and I was dreaming the future. I started to dream everything again. And when I would wake up in the morning and I'd remember, I'd be like, oh my gosh, I would trust that 100%. Like my mind can make up all kinds of crazy things that may or may not be true. But when I dream something, I know it's true. And so I just started to put all those things into motion. And then I was guided to go to life coaching school, and I had been working with a life coach for several years who was amazing, Marty Benjamin. I love her. And so I consulted with her and investigated some different kinds of schools, ended up choosing Coaches Training Institute, and went to Sacramento for my classes. There were 5 long weekends that I went through in Sacramento as part of the UC Davis. Back then, they're out of Marin County. But oh my gosh, I loved coach training. I just felt like so much came alive, and it just gave me so much courage and conviction to stay true to my spiritual path, to do everything I possibly could to make sure that I would stay really aligned with whatever my path is. So I started journaling, and I would, really committed to my Reiki practice, and and really doing like the deep, deep, deep self work. and I was still really struggling with chronic fatigue at that time. I was still working for UNR, but I just like felt like I was so supported in getting all those things done. So that was really amazing. And so I launched my business officially in 2009 on July 1st, the day after my termination from the University of Nevada. And by then I had done a lot of work on myself. And healing the little girls, coming back to like that story I told you at the beginning with the little girls behind the couch. It was like those little girls were living inside of me and they were trying so hard. Sorry for the barking. They were trying so hard to protect me from the world, but they just needed nurturing. So these were like my inner children. And I just had to give them so much love and some rest and some grace and protection and Reiki, and give them Reiki and really help them to heal at that deeper level. And so much a part of like healing me in that time as an adult was about healing those little girls, giving them a fair shake in life. So as I was launching my business, Sage Spirit Coaching and Reiki, I ended up having a lot of clients who had spirits attached to them. And that wasn't something that at that time Reiki really addressed directly. And so I had to really intuit my way through that. And there was one story where I was doing a private Reiki class for somebody who really was timid around spiritual community. She'd had some bad experiences, and she had been diagnosed with a terminal autoimmune liver-related condition where they said there was basically no treatment for her. And she was very yellow, like everything was yellow. Her eyes were yellow, everything was yellow. And she was really, really struggling and with her health. And so we did the class that day, and I shared Reiki with her, doing Reiki, like a Reiki session on her while we were in the class. And holy moly, I felt the presence of 40 Civil War veterans who were killed in a battle, who were all attached to her and all draining energy out of her system. And and so I just called in like the Reiki spirit masters, Dr. Yusui and Mrs. Takata and Dr. Hayachi. And I was like, oh, please help me to release these spirits from her space so that they can get where they need to go and she can have her energy back for herself and for her healing. And so I did that work, but oh my gosh, I felt so sick inside. My stomach was clenched up. I felt like I was nauseous. I was afraid I was gonna just not be able to sustain myself through the whole entire session. But I managed to get through it. And afterward, when I shared with her, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I felt them leave." And I somehow I knew they were there, but even like studying to be a psychic, nobody had ever seen them or identified them. And so she said, she just felt so much freer. And as I stayed in touch with her in the months to follow, she actually got better. And I think that is just so amazing and so cool. So, but these situations were happening, and I thought, like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't really know how, I don't really know how to do this in a way where it's not like almost kind of debilitating for me, where it doesn't take me a long time to recover my energy, where I would actually feel competent and know what I was doing. And then lo and behold, I have these people come into my life as really, really dear friends. And they're both shamans, and she's a teacher for the Fallen Society. And so, and her name is Jeffrey Talltrees. Seal. Sorry. So, so by and by, I had some sessions with Jeffrey. Seal, stop. Oh, there's a whole gosh darn car coming up the driveway, which is inconvenient. So we had So after I had some sessions with her, which were completely life changing, she did some spirit release on me where I had a past life version of myself that was stuck in my energy field. And so we were able to release that. And afterward, the healing was so profound. And then we did a destiny retrieval on me, and all of the signs and symbols started coming through around my connection with indigenous wisdom and how that was a part of me and how I was meant to express that in this world. And so I had no idea that that would be anything that I could access because of being a white bodied person, but it just came to be. So that was amazing. So